Hey guys, how's it going? Paul Harris here. So if you're watching this video, it means you've probably bought my Excel tutorial document. So thank you very much for buying that. Now I thought I'd released that a long time ago, and I thought what might be good to accompany that is a video going through each of the tabs and just fully explaining what each of the tabs on the Excel document do, just to walk through it, because it might not be as self-explanatory. I've tried to put as much detail down, but sometimes it's just not as easy as just running through with somebody else. So I'm going to just work through the document, and then you sort of have the document accompanying what I'm saying. And then after this video, I'm probably going to try and put together like a workbook or like questions that you can sort of follow to try and help you actually sort of formulate how you do these equations in real life, and maybe just do some like, not like a test, but like exercises, and then I'll have to accompany that with me going through how you answer each of the questions. So that'll come subsequently, but I haven't made that yet. I'm going to make this video going through each of the different tabs, so let's get into doing that. Okay, so we're in Excel. And the first tab is called Panel, and basically what we're doing here is just talking about what the panel section is and what each of the different areas show you within Excel. So the panel is the top box up here, and you have Home, and it goes right through to Developer. Now Developer might not show, but Developer is what you need to access if you want to start using macros, which is a slightly more complicated process that you can do within Excel. Just quickly, to access macros and developer toolbar, you'd need to go to your preferences, ribbon and toolbar, and then you scroll down, and there should be a tick box that you can access the developer tool. But that's by the by. What we have here is the panel up the top, and what this Excel is trying to explain is the different sections of the panel within Excel. So the first section which will open up is your Home section, and this, as I say beneath, is primarily used for formatting. So what do I mean by that? Well, where it says the text, you have bold, you have the different colors of the cells you want, and really the best way of you understanding this is just to start clicking around. But obviously you have the paint button, which it changes the color of the cells. You have the font color, so if we had a font in here, you can change this to different colors like blue, for instance. And then you have, if you want to center this, if you say you drag down this cell and you wanted to put the text to the middle of the cell, then you click on this area of the formatting, and then you can, if you have loads of text in a cell like this, and you go off the cell, it will just make it flat. But then if you click on wrap text, you can see that it wraps the text within the cell. Then if you want that to go over several cells, you can click on merge, and you see how it all formats. Even if, so if I just undo this, even with this section here, you have different formatting. So, for instance, if you have like a date, like the 1st of the 1st, 2021, this section shows you that that's a date. You could select that as a number, and Excel formats dates within a 5-digit code, which shows it normally starts with a 4. What's quite novel, just on a side note, is because it's formatted like a number, if you wanted to increase that number by 365 days, then you're going to have 44562. Then if I convert both these back to short date, you can see that that is going to be a year later, because it works it on a day basis, so that's why I converted to a number. Then you have, for instance, if I change this, if I click this comma, it'll put commas in between the numbers. And then when you click that comma, you can see that there's decimal places there, 2 decimal places. You can get rid of that by clicking this button. And you can see basically it's a huge formatting. And then you have, for instance, if I made this bold and italic, you can see I've just used F13. I've just changed that cell. But if I wanted to apply the same formatting to the other cell, then I click on this paintbrush over here, and you click on that cell, and you can see it converts over, the bold goes over to this cell. And otherwise, you see here this number's 44562. What conditional formatting does is it applies a rule to the number of cells you've selected. So if I wanted to apply a rule to both these cells to say I want all the numbers over 44,200 to turn red, then you can do highlight cells like this and greater than, and then you could put in the number 44,200, and as you'd expect, this number turns red. That's because you've applied a conditional format. Then you have things like insert cells, delete cells, format, the width of the cell, that sort of thing. And then you have other buttons up here for sorting and filtering. I don't use these generally very often, but they are available. I generally use shortcuts, which I get onto on the next tab. So that's basically what this is going through on this cell. Then you have the insert section of your Excel. Now, the insert section, I've basically highlighted the areas that I use the most within this area. So what I basically said is I use predominantly within the insert section this pivot table and these graphs. You have the shapes, but this is self-explanatory. You are just importing a shape. So if you want a text box, for instance, you can just import a shape and write within the text box. You could use that as a text box instead of applying a text box. But I think I have a tab that says graph, so I can get on to how to apply that, and I have the tab that says pivot. So there's no need for me to go into any greater detail. The formulas section, the main thing I use on here is if you have a huge document, so I'll go to formulas. If you have a huge document that has, say, 300,000 lines of data, and you're trying to use sum if formulas, and you're trying to use VLOOKUPs, then it might create a problem with Excel loading, taking too long to load, and it tries, because Excel, once you put a formula into a workbook, it generally tries to calculate the formula across all sheets. Every time you click out of a cell, it will try and calculate everything that's in that workbook. So you can restrict that from happening by going onto this calculator button up here and clicking manual. And then every time you do you click out of a formula, other than the cell you're in, it won't alter the rest of the workbook. Now, that can be a problem because you might want it to calculate stuff, but you might only want to calculate the sheet you're on. Well, you can click manual here and then just apply calculate sheet, or you can highlight the area like that and click calculate now. So it allows you to use large workbooks and not have it being so slow and clunky, and then you still have some sort of accessibility to calculating the sheet. Also, what's quite good, if you have circular referencing, you can click on this error check and you can see this circular reference. This is where you might try and you have cell A and you have cell B, and A plus B equals C. So cell C, you might have a formula that says add those two cells up. But then in cell A, you change that formula to say, I want B to equal C. Now, obviously, there's a circular reference there because you're doing A plus B equals C, and then you're saying A, you want it to equal B plus C, but that can't work because C is trying to calculate A plus B. So there's a circular reference. Now, sometimes those can be quite hidden. If you open up a workbook that someone else has been working on, you might get this warning come up all the time going circular reference. And this will actually allow you to see where that circular reference is happening. I realize I could just have done what I just told you. So if I do 4 plus 5... then I go like this, and I do this plus this. Then I go equals this plus this. Well, that didn't happen then. Maybe it's because... how does that work? Oh, it's because I still have this manual mode on. If I go to automatic, you can see this. It says there are more than one circular references. So I click OK. Now, you might be on a different sheet, but what this allows you to do is you can go circular reference, and it tells you where exactly the issue is. It's quite useful. Then you go down even more, and then you can see we're on the view section. The view section has things like freeze panels, which are quite useful. But these are the main ones I use, really. Even on the view, I just realized you have record macro here. So you don't actually need to access the developer bar. You might just be able to access it via the view button. Okay, so that's the main panel, and that's pretty much what you'll need to get started on Excel. If we keep working through, some of these I won't go through every single shortcut. I won't go through explaining every detail. I'll just sort of show you how I formatted the Excel to allow you to, so you can understand what's going on. So if I go to the shortcuts section and go to the top, I've tried to put in all the shortcuts that I use that really do help me. Now, the thing that I might have not included so much is shortcuts that involve pressing Alt first. So what do I mean by that? Well, on a PC, you have Alt button, and Alt will access the panel. So really, you can shortcut anything that's accessible via the panel by clicking Alt first, and then say if you want to access Home, you press Alt H, and then you're able to access different areas. So you can press Alt H M C, and what that would do is effectively it would go Alt meaning access panel, H meaning access home, M meaning access merge, C meaning apply the merge to the different cells. I believe that's the Alt. I'm on my Mac, so I don't even have the Alt button. I hate using Excel on a Mac. But this is my editing computer as opposed to my work computer. So, okay, so anyway, I digress. So I don't have that on here, but what I do have is the control-based shortcuts. So as you can see, the way this works is on column B, I've put what the shortcut, what you have to apply to the keys to generate the shortcut, and then on the right, I've told you what the shortcut does. So what I'm trying to say here is if you hold down Control and then you use the arrow keys, if you have a large data set and it's in a big table, you can sort of jump between different areas of that table by holding down Control. Then the next box down, it says Control A. So if you press Control and A on a table, it will highlight the entire table. I've tried to show that using this little box here. Shift Space will highlight the entire row like that. Control Space will highlight the entire column. And you see, you just work down, and so then I have Alt plus equals. Now that doesn't mean Alt plus, hold down plus and equals. It means just Alt and equals, and it will automatically generate the equals sum formula. So if you had like 4, 5, 6, then you press. I see it doesn't work on a Mac. But basically, if you pressed Alt equals or Control equals, it should generate an equal sum formula automatically, so you don't have to type it in. It's quite useful. It comes in handy from time to time. Then there's one of the main concepts, which we'll come onto on the Freeze Panels tab. I've designated a whole tab to it, is the concept of freezing cells. This is probably one of the most significant things that you have to learn on Excel to become better at data modeling and building up models. Something that I think goes a bit unmissed, because I see a lot of people making mistakes with freeze cells, that really will stop them from, benefiting greatly from being able to build up columns as you sort of go through workbooks. So I'll get a bit more onto that, but effectively what I'm saying here is, if you say you have digits like this, and you go, if I go equals on this and I press F4, so if you press F4, you can see what it does is it puts a $sign between the J and the 64 and before the J. And what that means is anything with a $sign before either the letter or the number will freeze that cell. So what do I mean by that? Well, once I scroll across, you can see it's only picking up cell J64. Whereas if you only had the $sign after the 64, after the J and before the 64, now when I scroll across, the column numbers change, CK, but the number stays the same. It's 64. Now, obviously, I've gone across, so that would apply anyway. But if I scroll down, you can see it still applies. There's only 64 because you've frozen that element of the equation. And you do that by pressing F4. Sometimes you have a lot of text in a cell. Now, I'm only going to go through this one, and then I might move on. But if you have loads of text on the cell and you don't want to have to go up here and click on here, you can press F2 and it will send you to the end of the cell. So that's quite good normally when there's a lot of text in a cell as opposed to just a small amount. F5 brings up this go-to box. Now, one thing that's quite useful about that is you can type in here any cell reference. So I could type in Z1000. It's going to send me to cell Z1000. So that's quite useful. There's other uses to it that I'm there, and then so on. So you should be able to just work your way through. So until, just working out what the shortcuts are. That's kind of how that sheet is formatted. Then in this cell, what I have is basically a generic set of data that basically I use throughout the workbook. Sort of shows you how you should format data. So what do I mean by that? Well, in column B you have the years, but then it goes down 2019, 2020, 2020, I don't have 2021, but you have both years, 2019 and 2020. And what I'm trying to say here is the more you can just have like a list of data, the better. Now you could say, well, why don't you have units, revenue, and price all within one column? And that's true, you could do that. But generally speaking, when it's like a different units, for instance, so you had like tons and then you had like yield, it's good to split those out because, here, they all relate to the same item. But when you have, and you could say, well, why is 2020 you don't have the January 2020 alongside it. But what's good about this is you can just pivot the data to get the information the way you want it to. But generally speaking, I don't really like this example over here that I've put where you have, 2019 revenue, 2020 revenue, 2021 revenue, because then it makes it difficult when you pivot information, which I'll get onto within the pivot tab. Once you pivot the information, you can just split that out anyway by adding in you can filter it for the different years, or you can add the year in and it will like subcategorize it automatically. So it's useful to have different units in different columns, but really all the other kind of data should be in list format, and it just makes it so much easier to use. Add in a freeze panel as you go to, which it says down here. Sorry, you click on view, and then you click on freeze panel, and you click enter. And as long as it's on the cell that you want, it will freeze from the top left corner. Pivot. So what I'm showing you here is I've gone back to my data, my random data, and I'm basically saying how you apply a pivot. So you go to your data, you can press Control A, you will select the entire amount of data. Now on a PC, you can use the shortcut Alt-N-V, enter, and I think it will add the pivot table automatically, but without using that, you can click on Insert Pivot Table, and that will take you, and then you press enter and it will automatically put it onto a separate sheet, or you could do it onto an existing sheet by pressing this button and clicking on a cell and then pressing OK, and it will add it to the existing sheet like this. And then you can see you can just add in XLs, and that's basically what it's telling you within the pivot table tab, how you add that in. The bit I'm trying to explain here with the generate pivot table is often when you add in a pivot table and you try and, sorry, let's go back to the pivot table tab. Well, often when you try and add in a pivot table and you try and use it by like, maybe you want to do a formula on top, you can see it says get pivot table. Now, that doesn't seem too bad, but it's like accessibility. When you drag across, it's dragging just that one cell that you've selected, 47271119. Now, I don't want it to do that. I want to just use the pivot table as if it was any other cell in Excel. That's what I've tried to explain down here, is the way you get rid of that is you click on, so if I go back, you see how it has that. But if I go on to the pivot table itself, and I go pivot table analysis, options, you see how there's a tick next to generate get pivot table? Untick that. Now I repeat the action. Now you see it doesn't say get pivot table anymore. It says C17. Now when I drag across, I have no problem using the functionality of the pivot table like it's a regular cell. The way you bring in pivot tables is you basically can just drag in formulas. You could have it in rows, you could have the values up here instead. You see, you just basically just drag and drop, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Might as well just test it out. Graphs. So really, data. I could talk about graph. Well, I don't know if I could talk about graphs for ages, but graphs really. The best type of graph is often the simplest, and the way that converts, you can see instantly what the data is, and it's able to tell you a story. Now, what does that limit you to? Well, you can be creative and try and make something look wonderful by using a load of different random graphs, but really, the two graphs you want are bar charts and line graphs. Those are the only two graphs. 99% of the time, those are the two graphs you're going to want. And then if you're trying to explain maybe the movement between one number and another number, say in 2019, revenue was 1 million, in 2020, revenue was 20 million, then you might want to show a waterfall that bridges the gap between those two numbers. But really, I would limit it to those two, because otherwise you're just going to you're not going to be able to see clearly what sort of data. And you can tell even from, if I look at this line graph here, I can see exactly what's happening throughout the year. If I use a bar chart, I can see kind of what's happening, but the line graph, I think, elevates it. some reason it's just more clear because it's a progression through the year. Now, a bar chart's quite good if it's less on time and across a year and more on just pure value, like revenue. So you have like 20 different product categories. I think bar charts are quite good at like showing you the different revenue for the entire year over across those categories. But really, when you're across a year, I think line charts are best. But if I go down to like a clustered column, as you can kind of see here, it's just not as nice as this. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory how I've tried to explain this. But you go on to select all this area, and you go on to insert, and you can click either recommended, which often gives you the view that I've showed you down here, or you can select exactly the type of graph that you want. And you can see I've said exactly how you can bring up this sometimes you might want two different axes. So you can do that by double-clicking on the line and selecting the secondary axis button on the line that you want. And it brings up two axes. Then on a waterfall graph, I've shown you here, this is exactly what I was saying about 2 points in time. So you have the 2019 revenue and your 2020 revenue, and it bridges the gap by saying like maybe the revenue is split by you selling apples, pears, bananas, or whatever I've tried to explain here. And you select the entire area, you go onto the graph section again, so it's insert, and you can see the waterfall table that I've explained here. Then once you've brought the waterfall table in, it looks like this. That's not good, because what you've tried to say is, exchange rate can explain £100 of it, or 100 of it. So that bridges the gap between 1,100. But then really you don't want it to continue increasing. What you want is to select this area, double click, and select on this set as total. Once you click that, you can see how it changes and creates a bridging point between this and the next lot, where you can click on that, double click on that, click set as total, and you can see you create a line graph there. The one way you'd make that nicer is to actually then set the axis by clicking on the axis and going on to 1,000, say, which is on this section, this bar chart, and then you can click enter here. That doesn't look great because obviously you've just cut it straight at the bottom. But if I chose like 800, okay, now you can see how everything's a bit chunkier in the area. So you don't really want the bar chart to be this long and then the different bridges to be really small. You want everything to be nice and clear and shown out. So anything where you're using tables and graphs, you want them to be as clear as possible. It's just going to get across the information better. So that's on the graph section. Then you have the free cells. Now, this is where I was explaining the importance of Excel and how it's important to really get a grasp of this free cell section. So it might be one of the most important tabs, to be honest, because yes, you use formulas quite a lot, but in every single formula, you may have to use a free cell. You may have to freeze a part of that formula, and this is how you do it. So I say free cells, but really you're freezing an element of the equation within that cell. And what have I tried to say at the top here? Well, if you press F4 on a formula, as I did before, so here you can see I have 2020 revenue, 2019 to 2016. I have different values as well. And what I'm trying to do here is create a variance between what happened in 2020 versus each previous year. And I don't want to have to click equals this cell minus this cell, then equals this cell minus this cell, then equals this cell minus this cell. So I want to do it in one clean formula. The way you do that is clicking here. You can see here I've frozen C16. C16 contains 1,000 2020 revenue. And E16 contains 2019. Now, I don't want to freeze E16 because as I drag through the formula, I want just the £1,000 to be frozen. So you go on to cell C16, and you can see what I've said here is when you click F4 once, it freezes both the column and the row. You press it again, it will just freeze the row. Press it again, it just freezes the column. What am I pressing again? F4. Press F4 again, you see it goes back to not freezing anything. You press F4 again, okay. It goes round and round in circles. If you highlighted the entire area, okay, of the formula, then so if you apply it to the entire area and then press F4, you can see it goes and freezes everything. You press it again, it freezes just the rows. You press it again, you freeze just the columns, and you see it goes round and round. But as we discussed, we just want to freeze we want to freeze just the C16, but everything, so the column and the row. Press enter, and what I've tried to show here is when you drag across then, using this little box at the bottom across like this, it basically produces the formula that you want. So if I click on here, you can see now I've frozen this cell, but now it's minusing against 2017. So you're getting versus the prior years. Then if I go down one, what I've produced here is another example that allows you to see how you just freeze one element. So what I've tried to show here is how I've just frozen the columns. So I've just frozen column C34. And then if you drag across, you can see how it produces the formula beneath. And if I drag down, so I've tried to show it. It's not. This is why I'm making this kind of video, so I can show you exactly what I was trying to achieve by, when I produced this document. So you can see here how once you've gone down, it's gone down the column, so it's now minusing against 2000 because all I've done is froze the column. But as I go across, it's always reducing against the 2000 amount. And this is the whole thing about building up formulas, is you're building it so it allows you to just drag across, or even easier, you can copy and paste across. You don't have to drag all the time. And then similarly with this area, what you have here is, what I've tried to produce here is a sort of, gross margin sort of exercise. And here you have the revenue in rows 54, and you have the costs in 56 to 59. Now, what you want to do here is you might want to create a variance against each individual cost. So it's sort of like a sensitivity analysis, sort of. It's not really. It's showing you the different variances against different cost profiles. So you can see here I've frozen row 54. So I've pressed F4. So if I press F4 once and twice. Okay, frozen that. Now when I go across, pulling across the formulas on rows, which is great. What do I mean by pulling across? Here it's showing against cell G54. But when I pull down as well, you see how it's frozen and it's still reducing against the revenue, which is in D54. So it's frozen the row. I've spent a lot of time emphasizing that, but it is very important because a lot of the time Excel, and I think this is where I can sometimes benefit with Excel, is I'm quite a visual person. And I think although it is numbers, often at times when you're in Excel, everything works on a grid. Everything's working across or down. It's all very 2D. But sometimes it just takes a bit of visualization to understand how something's going to work. Sometimes I get some people get confused sometimes as well, like you can almost have like a third element. Like really everything can only be done on two axes. You either pull stuff across or down. You can't go deep. It's not 3D or anything like that. So there's only ever two sides to it. I might not have explained that properly, but the more you use Excel, the more you'll start to realize, you can either go across or down to try and produce formulas. Okay, and then now if I go across, everything else should be more straightforward because they're all equations. It's a little bit more tricky in the first sort of what I was trying to express with the first sort of 7 tabs. Probably a little bit more difficult to explain, but when you go across, hopefully this should be rather self-explanatory because in each one, I have basically what I'm trying to show you is in each tab, I say what the formula is, and then I've tried to explain in each tab what each formula does. So I'll explain it and then show you the formula, and then you can play around. But count. So what does count do? Well, count is going to literally count how many cells have some sort of digit text in it. So here you can see it says 13. The formula is, and most formulas do start with equals, then the thing that's going to trigger Excel to recognize it's that formula, so in this case count, open brackets, select the area. Okay, there's 13 rows. Okay, here you can see there isn't a digit in this column. So when you apply it there, you can see there's only 12. Okay, so that's what I've tried to express there. Count if. So this is when you want to add, every time you have an if function, you're adding an element that says, I want to exclude anything but, this logical test. So the logical test in this scenario is how many in this row has 2020. And you can see, normally with formulas, what happens is it allows you to see what you kind of need to put in each section of the formula for it to work. So range, meaning the range of area that you want to apply this logic to, and then the criteria is what does the cell need to say. Now, if you were doing it on text, you would have to apply quotation marks either side. So it works with numbers because Excel always recognizes numbers. But if I drag this across, obviously it's not going to recognize any 2020s. But if I typed in here org, it wouldn't recognize anything here as well, because that's mainly because there's a 2 and then org. But if I take off this and do org, it's not going to recognize any org either, because org meaning August. The reason why that is because you need to put quotation marks either side of text when you're using it as a formula. So if I go like this, you can see there's 1 August in that list. Okay? Average, this is when you want to just take an average of a row. That's pretty self-explanatory, equals average. The sum of product is quite a useful... I don't think I've even put equal sum here. Oh yes, I have, but much further across. Interestingly, some of the more harder formulas seem to be first here, but I feel like I need to explain sum before I've explained sum product. Sum is where you just literally add up a column. Okay, so instead of having to do, equals that, plus this, plus this, plus this, you do a sum of the entire column. And again, you can apply... by pressing F4, you can freeze elements. So for instance, if you want to do like the if you want to go down this list, why do I say that? Well, you can do sum, this, do the same cell, okay? It's obviously just going to add up 1 cell. But you can freeze H8. And now when you scroll down, you see the sum gets larger by each individual cell. So you don't have to, it's like compounding as you're going down. It's not compounding, because compounding would suggest that you're... Well, I don't know. Maybe it is compounding. But there we are. You're adding it up. Each one is sort of cumulatively getting larger and larger. Sum product is where you're multiplying. So say, for instance, here you have the unit and you have the price, and you want to generate the revenue. What you would have to do is apply in 2 steps. You'd have to apply a formula here to the unit and price to get the revenue. Or the cost, whichever way you want to look at it. And you can see here, then when you add up that entire row, it gets back to 7.5 million. But you can do that in one formula, which is to do sum product. And the first array is this column. The second array is this column. What it does, it says sum, meaning add up each individual part. So sum 3275 multiplied by 152. Plus 3341 multiplied by 190, plus go down the list. So that's what that formula is doing. Left and right is very useful. I find I use this far too often. I don't know why. It seems to come in handy, but the formula is basically taking, say you have a large array of data, you have a large text, concats maybe, someone's done something funny with the data. You see here it says 2019 Jan Q1. Well, you might want just the first 4 digits. So you can say 2019. So you say you just wanted the first 4 of that cell. You use the formula left, and then you pick the criteria and then click how many digits you want from that left item. So 4 digits. Another element to this is that will produce a text file. Now, if you wanted it to be number, meaning you wanted 20, you knew that what was going to produce from that formula was a number. Instead of having to do this and then copy and pasting it as a number, you can do number value beforehand, like this, and it will automatically generate it as a number. Okay, so that's an extra add-on here because you've purchased this video, so have to give you value. Okay, so yeah, and then you can see right does the same thing on the other end. Mid does the same thing. Well, it doesn't do the same thing. This one's a little bit more complicated, which is mid is basically picking out text from the middle of a cell. So here I want to just pick out the month So you have to do the formula mid, select it. Then you have to do the start number, which is 5 digits across, which will be the J. And then how many digits across from that do you want to isolate? So 3 digits across from that. So it's going to pick out J and then A-N. Okay, so that's how it starts selecting that. I feel like there was something else I wanted to say then. Oh yeah, the only other thing that you can do here, given that everything's the same number across, is you can use this this button up here called text to columns, which would be the only other way of splitting it out. But you want to try and find the easiest way, and just instead of having to try and... You never want to get to a point where you're having to create new tabs, pulling data across, doing your edits, pulling it back, copy and pasting. You just don't want to get into that. But you can do this thing where you click either fixed width. It's not really clear, but you can sort of... After selecting the text to column, you can select and then put a line where you'd want a divide. So you see how I got... It's really small, but you can see how between the number, the year, and the month, and then the quarter, I've put these lines. And then when you press finish, you can see it splits it out. So that's when you click text to columns and you highlight an area, text to columns. Say there was, like, if I do this again and go, and allows you to conjoin different elements. And then if you do like quotations, you can slot in, say, a dash and then click and again. Okay, you see I've created that formula then. Say if I just paste this as values. Okay, so this is another variation of text to column. Is that if now I select this and I click text to column, delimited, click next, and then you select dash, you see how it automatically puts in a line where all the dashes are? And then if I press finish, you can see how it splits that out. So there's a couple of things there that's quite useful. And I actually explained and within the next one, so I've just done that. So don't need to explain that. Other than the fact if you want to do and then you write in a text like this, you can do that. Okay? Using text. Okay, so here is where I'm saying that when you're applying text, you have to put the quotation marks yes, no. In this scenario, I've said, when if this says red, say yes. If otherwise, say no. Now, obviously, if you took off this quotation like this, it's just not gonna work. It says, see, name. VLOOKUPs. So as I say here, this basically allows you to pull out data. So it'll roll down a list, and when it finds the lookup that you're looking for, so in this case red from column F, it will select the units, and the way you do that is applying this formula here. So find red in between these columns. The left column always has to be the column that you're searching for the VLOOKUP at. So what I mean there, that column contains red, okay, column F. Then how many columns across would you like to pull the data out? So 2 columns across will pull out 3, 4, 5, 8. If you wanted to pull out the revenue, you go 3 columns across, okay? A variation, HLOOKUP's the same way, but a variation on this is the VLOOKUP match tool. And what I mean by this is, what this allows you to do is the same formula, okay? So what I'm doing here is I'm saying B20 VLOOKUP, B28, which is red, then select the area, which is this area, freezing all this. So I'm freezing cell B28, okay? I'm still freezing the B on cell B28. Then I'm freezing the entire area that I would like to select the data from. And then what I'm using is this match function. Now, match function will simply pull out how many digits across or down is the item that you're searching for. So up here, I've explained this. So match, if I'm searching across this column headings and I'm saying how many columns across is the word unit? Well, from color, it's 1, 2. Revenue is 3 units across from color, 1, 2, 3. Now, what that means is you can slot into this VLOOKUP a match function that says, if I see units, pull out the digit that was 2 rows across from red. Okay, so what this allows you to do is create this formula, which I've explained here, and then when you drag across, because I've frozen each of the different cells the correct way you want it to, so with the match function, I've frozen C on 27, and I've frozen the entire row area, you then can pull across this formula. You don't have to then, instead of having to click 3 instead of match, and then having to it allows you to basically develop formulas and build them up on your Excel. Okay? Simply put. Here I've put all the different subtotal functions. So if you type in subtotal 9 and then select the area, it's going to, if you go down here, you can see 9 is sum. Then you could have product, min, max, count, all these kind of areas. What a subtotal allows you to do as well is then if you apply a filter to it, when you filter, say for Q1, it's going to change the total. That's the value. Sum, if you did the sum function, it would just keep the number the exact same, but subtotal will take into consideration the fact you filtered the document. So I was in the middle of editing that video and I realized I'd missed out several tabs that I still need to explain. So I'm going to explain that now, but there's a slightly different format to how I'm looking at you and the screen. So, okay, so we're back. So we're back in Excel. Just to go through the additional tabs that I've missed off. Min, max. This is pretty self-explanatory. Minimum selects the minimum number in a column. Maximum selects the maximum number in a column. So the minimum number here, you select the range. So the minimum number is 373,000, 374,000 if you round up. That's pretty self-explanatory. Then if we go to SUMIF, this is one of the most important functions within Excel. What SUMIF will effectively allow you to do is like a VLOOKUP, where you're just selecting one value, which is the first value in the list. When Excel will go down the list and pick out what the first value is, SUMIF will select a criteria and add up all the values that that belong to that specific criteria. So here, 2019, I'm saying I want to add up everything that has the criteria 2019 within column H. So this is the way you do it. SUMIF equals range, which is the range of where you want to apply the criteria to, then the criteria, comma, criteria, then comma, sum the values. Okay, so that's how that formula works. SUMIF supplies the exact same logic, but with two criteria this time. But with the SUMIFs function, you have to sort of move things around, which means the first set of values within your formula, so SUMIFs, then the first column has to be the value that you're adding up, which is slightly different to the SUMIF function, where the values you want to add up is the last part of the bracketed equation, whereas here it's the first. Then you do the criteria, so here is like the criteria range, so the range first is going to be, I want to select the column with 2019s in, then the criteria is 2019. As you can see, selected by that cell. You could even write in 2019, but I've said I want to pick the cell out. And then the next criteria range is the different quarters in the year, and then the next criteria is Q1, which is selected here within cell C8. Okay? And then you can, as you can see in each of these examples, I've frozen different parts of the equation. Concats. Effectively what a concat does is it compresses all the different information from a cell into one cell. So the concat here is basically C14 and E14, and you can see it compresses it, so it says 2019 C1. Now, what's the importance of that? Well, I prefer using concats and then just using a SUMIF function. So then I've created the list down here. Now what allows me to do is just like on the SUMIFs tab, I've wanted to search for 2019 and Q1. I've wanted to do the same thing here, but now it's 2019 and Q1 is compressed into one cell. That means that now I can just search column B for just that one item. Okay, so I'm not having to do SUMIFs function anymore. I create a concat, I create an a unique identifiable code, and then what I can do is search for that item using a SUMIF function. The value of doing that is that SUMIFs work far quicker than SUMIFs. So a lot of my workbooks, you think as you get more sophisticated at using Excel, you'd build up greater and greater formulas, right? You'd think, oh, the better you get at Excel, it is true that you start to know more formulas because you start using them more frequently. But that's not to say that the formulas get harder. It's just you know a larger variety. And the whole trick with Excel is building up your knowledge base of different formulas, not so that you can make one really, really long, hard equation that no one can follow within one cell. That's not the correct way of doing data modeling. What it allows you to do is create very simple formulas and do things quicker. So sum if works better than sum ifs. It just speeds up the workbook. The same way a VLOOKUP will speed up a workbook versus using some other formulas like index match. You notice that I don't have index matches in here because I don't have to use them. If you use a VLOOKUP with a match function, it works muchly the same as an index match function or an index match. So whenever you create a formula which just searches for one column and doesn't work on a like searching down and across using like an index match, it's going to speed up your workbooks. And that's really what data modeling is about, and getting better at using formulas. Because really, if you're ever in a cell, and you sometimes see these in people's workbooks, like a cell with a formula which is, I don't know, 3 lines long, it's not going to... No one else is going to be able to follow that formula. And also, it's not very checkable. It's not viable. It's, if you're trying to audit that cell and just trying to understand what's going on, it's not going to be easy to follow. And really, a workbook, the best workbooks, are ones that actually split out each of the workings so you can actually follow where people are going with their calculations. You don't have to just be a master at that one workbook. Anyone can pick it up and use. And that's really the true sign of a good workbook. And the same way as, if there's a mistake in the equation, it's easier to follow if it's all split out. So simple formulas. What's the point of me saying all this? To go back to here, I've used a SUMIF function, and using things like concats speed up my workbooks, okay? Then you have if functions and OR functions. And I have these within columns K to Q of this workbook. And effectively what an if function does is you're basically saying you're putting a logistical test involved within, you're putting some sort of logic in the formula which says if cell I9 is greater than 150, then show me what is in. So if it's true, value is true, show me what's in column I. Otherwise, add a 0, see? So I've added different equations here for if. I've done a text if. So if F9 says red, so F9 equals quotation marks red, then put a 1, and then if not, put 0, So I put different values here, which shows you how to use if functions. And here, down below in rows 40, I've added 2 if functions at one time. So this works on the basis of if cell I40 is greater than 150, then put what's in I40. If it's false, okay, so if true, put what's in I40. If it's false, then apply this if function. So then I've said, okay, if that's false, then say yes if it says April in cell C40. So you're going to build up on the basis of, if it's false, then do another if function. If that's false, do another if function. You can sort of build up if functions by doing that. And then you have an AND function. So this works on the basis of, you're applying a logic, but here you have to have 2 sets of logic to apply for it to be true. In this instant, it's if I71 is greater than 150, and, so you put a comma, next logical test, if F71 equals black, okay, then you can put what's in in cell I71. So that works on and then on OR, you have it so it can either be either or. So with AND, it has to both apply. With OR, the same thing, the same way you apply the function, but this time it says, if this is true, or this is true, then show me this value. That's basically how it works. So what I've basically said here with this reference code, this reference tab, is it's very important to build this is another important tab that seems very, why did I bother including this? Well,
to have a reference area in your workbooks where all your VLOOKUPs are pulling from, all your SUMIFs are pulling from, anything where, you have foreign exchange, dates, quarter, anything where you're changing, like identifiable, say you're changing, like you have countries and you want to turn the countries into airport codes, something like that. It's important to have all your references within one section, because then, instead of just having all your references within the individual tabs within your Excel, if it's in one area, then anyone can go and reference within that one area. You can start building up these large references that you can apply to lots of other Excel workbooks. You just copy and paste the references into this other workbook, and you have them all there, and you can build them up over time. So it's important to have them all in one area, and then when you're building up data models, you're always pulling from that one tab. And that's it. I think I've actually worked through it this time. Had to do it in 2 stages. I thought I covered all the tabs. I thought it was unusual I hadn't done SUMIFs, but there we go. Now I'll cut back to the exit part of the previous video. And that's it. I've explained the document, okay? Hopefully that's useful. Hopefully that was worth the extra little bit of money. Hopefully you've bought the Excel, because otherwise you've just watched a video of me explaining something, and maybe you have to now go and pay for that Excel document. It took a little while to put together. Hopefully it's useful. Hopefully this video is useful. I'll try and put some exercise sheets together for Excel. Maybe people will find that interesting. Pick that up. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully that's been useful. Hopefully that clarifies things. Maybe you bought this Excel and thought, I don't understand the way that this guy's explaining it. Hopefully this has made it a bit more clear. Thanks for watching. Thanks for purchasing. Appreciate the support. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.